Yeah, so Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men. That's the name of this book that I read. It's written by Hugh Ross and Mark Clark, and it's not a very long read, but it was fascinating. And so I'm going to it's like a book report tonight to kind of go through some of the things that I've read. Thank you so much. And so what do y'all know about UFOs?
Not much.
I know that when I was 13, I wanted to go visit the Roswell Space Museum.
Oh, yeah?
And I was underwhelmed. Let me tell you, it was a disappointment.
You went? Really?
Yeah, it was my birthday present.
No way.
Yes, because I was on a Girl Scout trip.
From Dallas, y'all went all the way out there.
It wasn't just for that. But
Okay.
It was we were on a camping trip to Girl Scouts. And we were in Roswell at the time because that was where the camping was. And
Yeah.
I was like, they were like, man, it's going to be your birthday. We could go. You get to pick what we do the day of your birthday. And I'm like, we're going to go to the Alien Museum.
Yeah.
And it was awful. It was like it was a room about this size.
Oh, no.
Maybe a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
And there was like nothing in it.
There was a bigger one. I'm trying to think where the Boy Scouts. We went to Big Bend, and somewhere on the way to Big Bend was a town. I don't know what the name of it was, but it had a bunch of alien stuff, because it was close to Roswell, kind of. And they had an alien museum, and it was bigger than that. And they even had like parts of the spaceship that crashed in 1947, so-called, and they had a little typed up card next to it and everything. And they had a little display, like every 30 minutes, the smoke would come out and the spaceship lights would blink and the ramp would come down and flashing lights, and you see aliens in the smoke and everything. It was really cheesy. It was definitely made like 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and it was all tin foil and duct tape, and
That sounds like what I went to.
Yeah.
But I was 13, and I definitely was like, I
Oh.
get to see,
Yeah.
So I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
This is so sad.
Anyone else? Anything that you've read, or what do you think UFOs are?
What does UFO stand for?
Oh, very good.
Flying object.
Yeah, so it could be anything, it could be.
That you throw.
Yeah, it's unidentified, it's in the air, it's a UFO. Until you identify it, then it becomes an identified flying object. Mm-hmm.
So when we do find an alien,
Yeah.
it'll no longer be UFO.
That's right, exactly. If you know what it is, then all of it will be explained. Yeah, so this is the book, and this is the table of contents. We're not going to go through all 16 chapters plus the appendices, but there's, it covers quite a bit. There's some history on the UFO craze, and the KS stands for Ken Samples, the HR stands for Hugh Ross, and MC stands for Mark Clark. And so Mark Clark, working for the government for many years, wrote about the government cover-ups and conspiracies. Hugh Ross, being an astrophysicist, wrote about life on other planets and probabilities of evolution, meaning what is the probability that life would develop on this planet and on other planets, and that we could interact with them and so on. And then the probabilities of interstellar space travel. And then you get into the different classifications of UFOs, the types of UFOs, and then these are UFOs. So we'll determine what a RUFO is instead of a UFO. Yeah. And then abductees and conductees and UFO cults and religions. So,
Like Scientology?
well, I don't know if it's a UFO cult, but yeah. So we'll get into some of that stuff. Okay. And then the kind of a summary and comparing the Bible and the UFO lore. So, yeah. So it's very interesting. So there are UFO classifications. Do you know any of the classifications of UFOs?
Like how you determine different kinds of UFOs?
Yeah, so like if you see something in the sky versus, there's certain, with all these reports, they started saying, well, we got to have a taxonomy, we got to have a classification scheme. And so back in the early days, I don't know when they wrote it, I guess his book was in 1970, Hynek's book was in 1970, they started classifying these UFOs. And so most of them are distant, they're elusive, they're difficult to analyze, and often they involve religious or psychic experiences. So there's some, it's not just a passive observation that it affects you sometimes. And so that's kind of weird. And so this is his categories from his 1972 book, The UFO Experience. The first UFO really was, at least the first flying saucer, I think, was the Roswell crash that in 1947. So 47 to 72, that's really not that long, so that's from the first spaceship crash, they said, in 47 to 1972. That's a good, almost 30 years of UFO reports and so on. So he came up with this classification scheme of the different experiences or reports. So distant sightings are a thing. So if you see a distant sighting, then it could be lights in the night sky. Nocturnal lights is one of his categories. Daylight discs. So in the daytime, you see a bright disc of some sort. And then radar visual. So you see it and you see it on radar. So that's a little higher category. These would be radar blips, and then you look out and you actually see an object there. There's lots of places where you have radar blips and you don't see anything. It's hard to say that was not a big bird or something like that. Some kind of, heat updraft or something like this. Something could bounce radio waves back at the detector, and you look and you don't see anything. But this would be both radio and visual observation. So those would be distant sightings, something that's more than 500, I think they said more than 500 feet away. Yeah. And then they have close encounters, like the movie, right? Right? So that was from his classification scheme, was close encounters of the first kind. That would be a UFO sighted within 500 feet. So a football field is 300 feet. So not quite 2 football fields away. That's pretty close, And then, but no interaction with you or the environment. So you don't see trees swaying. You don't see, any kind of blast or anything like that. No interaction with you or the environment, but you did see it within 500 feet. So that would be a close encounter of the first kind. Second kind would be you see an impact or an effect on the environment, like a depressed ground. You saw something there, it's disappeared. You go and look, you see where the ground was depressed. So that would be a UFO, a close encounter of the second kind. You didn't interact with anybody, but you saw it within 500 feet. And upon further investigation, you saw depressed ground or maybe some scorched earth or stalled automobiles. So this is a really common thing where the car shuts off, the radio goes off, and then you see it within 500 feet. And so that would be a close encounter of the second kind. And lots of reports of this kind of stuff. And then the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right, was living occupants of the UFO are seen. Okay. Typically, this is at night, and there's typically 1 to 2 witnesses. Of course, in that movie, all these people were summoned mysteriously to Devil's Tower in Wyoming, I think. Is it Wyoming?
I think so.
Yeah, and that was the place, and there was some base there that the government was hiding, and they all saw the UFO, and they saw the people inside, and I think some of the people got on it. I watched the movie fairly recently, and they got in the ship and left, so it's kind of crazy. That would actually be beyond the third kind. So this was as far as Hynek went, and then credible interactions started being reported, and so they had to increase the levels. So they went up to 5. And so now the fourth kind is direct contact with the witness, extensive interaction, often taken aboard, whatever that means, or abducted. So either willingly or unwillingly taken aboard or abducted. Yeah.
They didn't even make it on the road.
Yeah, that's right. And then the fifth kind would be the witness. The witness suffers permanent physical injuries or death. So people have died in mysterious circumstances, and so these are the classifications of UFO encounters.
So the guy from Fire in the Sky had a fifth kind example.
What is that? Is that a movie recently? I saw some trailer for a movie that scared the snot out of me.
So it was a movie that depicted the events as recorded by the people. It was done when I was in high school. So
Okay.
we're talking mid-90s.
Okay.
When the movie was done. and these 5 guys went camping, and one of their buddies was kidnapped, was abducted.
Okay.
And they came down to the closest place to make a phone call, called the police. The police came in, the FBI came in. They're like, "You guys killed him." You just tried to kill him.
Man, that's terrifying.
They
Yeah.
did lie detector tests on him and everything. And searched anything, and about a week later, he just showed up.
Really?
Yeah. And then so that's like the first half of the movie. The second half of the movie is everything from his point of view.
Yeah.
He was abducted and stuck in there, and then how he did that, and so it was an interesting movie. Yeah. So then they all stories were all matched up.
Yeah.
Between all 5 people.
Yeah, and so this would be one of those situations that we'll talk about a residual UFO experience. So that we'll get. So remind me when we come back to that. But that's also a great example of not having overly rapid justice, right? Because it was clear to the law enforcement that these guys killed their friend. You know, and to take them out back and hang them from the tree and then the guy shows up. Mm-hmm. Like, uh-oh. You know, so it's nice that our justice system moves a little slow. I think it moves too slow, but you know, there's a pendulum, right? We don't want to move it too fast either. There's a balance there, and you know, I don't want someone to be on death row for 20 years, you know, but 2 days may be too short, right? So anyway, that's a totally different topic. And then Valley, so Hayek and Valley, he has some slightly different categories. So in terms of nocturnal lights and daylight discs, he just says, no, let's call it an anomaly, a flyby, or a maneuver. So he has different levels. I don't know what he would classify 1 through 5, but anyway, I think I like this better than nocturnal lights and daylight discs. There could be a radar anomaly or a visual anomaly, 1 through 5, a flyby where you see it moving. So it's not just in the air someplace, but it's actually moving. And then a maneuver, you see it take a maneuver that's not physically possible. So like a 90-degree turn at 1,000 miles an hour. You know, that's not something that any kind of physical material could do. That the inertia that would take to turn something that sharp would destroy the object, okay, if it had mass. So, and then close encounter, he kept Hynek's close encounters 1 through 5. So anyway, there's these different UFO researchers, and so ology, right? Biology, sociology, they're ufology, so they're ufologists. Okay. And so it's kind of interesting because there's so much discounting of these kinds of events that many of them are reluctant, right? They got into this, they started looking into it, and they're scientists. They take it seriously, but they're not like there is little, they want to avoid being a kook, right? They're approaching it as a physicist or an engineer would approach it. And so they're really trying to let the evidence speak for itself and not get too conspiratorial or anything like that. So these guys are pretty legit researchers as far as I can tell. So now that we know the classification system, this is a video of the forward-looking infrared camera on a fighter jet, a Navy fighter jet. And so there's this object here. Now, I don't really know much about the heads-up display. So, you know, we've got all kinds of numbers on here. So I can't tell what the velocity of this thing is, but they've locked onto it. So and you see it kind of changes shape a little bit. They've switched to a different kind of sensing element view. Notice how it's not very distinct. It's definitely an object on the radar. They would definitely have better resolution if it was like a normal object. I mean, you can go online and look up FLIR images of people running, you know, across the desert as they're shooting at them, you know, in wartime. And these cameras have much better resolution. So the fact that this object is fuzzy is one of the characteristics of UFO sightings. Many times it's hard to get a high resolution image of it for whatever reason. Okay. So this was one of the videos that you sent me, but it was behind the paywall on New York Times.
Oh, was it already?
Yeah. And so I just Googled the Pentagon UFO videos, and there's a Wikipedia page dedicated to it. And so I pulled these down off of Wikipedia. So that was good. So here's the Wikipedia page. It shows some of the other videos. And so let me switch my video over to see the Wikipedia stuff. Let's see. No. Is this one? Oh, this was it right here. Yeah. Okay, and then I got to turn this one off. Okay, there it is. All right. So let me see when I click on the video if it stays. So that was the FLIR video. This gimbal video is really great. There's a little language warning here. Yeah.
Now going against the wind. The wind's 105 knots to the west. Oh! Amen.
So they're tracking how fast it's going. I can't see how fast it's going on this.
So that's Mach 0.59.
Where?
Bottom right corner of the screen.
Oh, down here?
Left corner.
Left corner?
And it says, you see the ADV okay?
Oh, yeah?
There's a Mach 0.59, so they're going 0.59
Okay.
sound.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. And then this one here, this one you can really tell how fast it's moving. It shoots through the screen a couple of times. So it'll shoot through. There it goes, right there. And then they lock on it. See? So he got him. He's like, I got him. So this was persistent enough. This was in 2004, the first one. They found a target off the coast of Southern California. They've been tracking an unusual aircraft for 2 weeks prior to the incident. The aircraft would appear at 80,000 feet before descending rapidly towards the sea and stop at 20,000 feet before hovering. He reported that he saw an object, white and oval, hovering above an ocean disturbance. He said estimated it was 40 feet long, and he said in an interview that a total of 4 people, 2 pilots and 2 weapon system engineers or officers in the back seats of 2 airplanes witnessed the object for about 5 minutes. He said that as he spiraled down to get closer to the object ascended up until it disappeared. And then a second wave of fighters took off from the Nimitz to investigate. Underwood's fighter that just took off was equipped with the advanced FLIR camera, and he recorded the FLIR video that was up here. So that it was persistent enough for them to scramble a couple more fighters to go see it, and then one of those fighters had a forward-looking infrared pod on it and was able to capture that video of it. Yeah. So how would you classify this object that they saw from our classification system? Well, let's look. Let's go back to our system. So these are the classifications. Radar visual. Probably radar visual. They saw it on radar. They saw it visually. But it's not an encounter because they were pretty far away and they didn't have any interaction with it. Now, maybe he said over a disturbance of the ocean, so you might be able to say there was some disturbance affecting the environment. So it might be, if they were close enough, they might be able to classify this as a close encounter of the second kind. So anyways, kind of interesting. And then these others, the Go Fast and the gimbal camera, I was trying to see how, I didn't see anywhere where they speculated how fast the object was going. Okay. So it's, that's interesting. Yeah, and so let's go back to our PowerPoint. And so NASA's launching a study on this unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP, commonly known as UFOs. And a group of 16 people will gather data on unidentified objects in the sky and release its findings to the public in mid-2023. This isn't the first time that they've done this. There have been other investigations of these unidentified flying objects. And so, 95% of these are explained away. So there have been lots and lots of reports for the past, almost 80 years now. A lot of times it's natural objects. You're flying in an airplane, you see some disk down below you that's moving really quick, matching your speed, and you realize that it's the moon reflecting off the surface of the calm sea or a lake or something like that. So that's how you might be fooled by the moon. You look down, you see something bright that's traveling really fast below you, and it's just you're looking at the moon's reflection. So that's one of the, sometimes that's how when they investigate it, they decide it was a natural object or a star or a cloud or a meteor, or it could be a man-made object, balloons, new aircraft. That's what really is feeding a lot of the sightings in New Mexico and Arizona and those places, because we do have experimental aircraft and we do fly them in the southwestern deserts and experiment on those. The Lockheed Martin Skunk Works was there beside Area 51, and that's where they flew the stealth bomber first and the stealth fighters and so on. And these planes were really strange looking. And so, it's possible that these were new aircraft or different kinds of rockets. It's also possible they were false images. Internal ghost images are inside the lens. There's lots of reflective surfaces, and so you might be able to see an anomaly in a photograph or in a digital, image or video, and it's some either defect in the lens or some internal reflection on the lens. And so sometimes they've been able to repeat some of the phenomenon by analyzing the cameras and the elements that they were using to detect it. So those would be false images. And then there's hoaxes and pranks and frauds. A lot of times those are evident right away. And then there's subjective causes where the person has other social or neurological issues. And so they kind of make at least maybe not explained away, but make a doubtful report. And so you're like, yeah, this person sees these things everywhere. And then there could be a combination of all of these things. They say, well, these are all just explained away. They're hoaxes, misunderstandings, pranks, whatever. But not all of them are explainable. And so it may be 90 to 95% are explained away in some way, but there's still that residual amount left over. And so those residual amounts would be the residual UFOs, so our UFOs. Yeah, and so this, has led to this claim that there's a government conspiracy. You remember storming Area 51 a few years ago? The guy that did the Naruto run behind the reporter. Yeah. It was so great. There was a reporter there talking on CNN or something, and this guy runs behind him like, it was the best. Yeah. Anyway, it was so good. So yeah, of course, Groom Lake, Area 51, Roswell, New Mexico, and other curious sites have just been, fodder for all of this. So supposedly, this is what began it all. This UFO supposedly crashed in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947 on this fellow's farm. Okay. And it left some debris, and supposedly this alien tech and the aliens, some people say there were aliens on board, and they were all taken to Area 51 and stored there. Okay, so that's why this lady's saying, locked up for what? You got aliens locked up behind bars in Area 51. We're going to go see them and release them or whatever. And so there was aluminum-like debris. So like about a month later, this farmer, he noticed something had crashed on his farm, but no big deal, and he didn't bother picking it up or anything. But he went back a month later and did pick up everything. So what made him go back and pick it up? Coincidentally, a week, like 10 days after this so-called crash in Roswell, New Mexico, there was a pilot report of 9 disc-like objects near Mount Rainier in Washington. And so that report that this guy saw flying saucers, this pilot, and pilots are reputable people, so he saw something in Washington, and the news reports had reported that something had crashed on this person's farm, and so he went out and grabbed the debris. And they said it was aluminum with had Scotch tape and some light wood with it. Some of the tape had markings on it, and it all weighed about 5 pounds total. So it wasn't like this enormous ship and so on. So the conspiracy theory people say, well, they brought that stuff back and threw it on the ground, so that, there was a month time, so chain of custody, what can you say, right? So they say that was planted there, that the real alien stuff was in Area 51. So there's no convincing the conspiracy theory folks. This book has a really good breakdown of the weather balloon idea and even the stuff that was used to make it. And so it's pretty interesting. So curiosity and fear soared, and press pushed the stories. And so the Air Force is needing to make a statement. Okay, this is what really made things worse. You had the first group make a statement, and then the second group made a statement that contradicted the first group. It's two different groups. It's just like at the university here. We have 6 different colleges, and if the president doesn't have a good control over who's talking to the press, College of Science could say one thing, College of Humanities could say something else, and everybody's like, this university is covering something up, when it could just be incompetence and lack of communication. So the first report, the official press release, and this was from a group that had nothing to do with the meteorology or the weather balloon stuff. Okay, they just said, yes, a flying saucer was recovered. Okay. The second press release said remnants of a weather balloon was recovered. The weather balloon group actually was putting up weather balloons, and it was a top secret group. Now, why would weather balloons be top secret? It's just meteorology, right? That's much more common now than it was in 1947. So miniaturized instruments were not common, okay? We didn't have good battery technology. And so, this was research. Weather balloons at that point was research, and it's the Cold War. And so we're doing atmospheric testing. The Soviets are working on a bomb program. They're going to do atmospheric testing. And we wanted to know if we could put radiation sensing equipment in the sky to detect whether somebody was lighting off a nuclear weapon. But all that's classified. And so that puts another layer of complexity on this. It's like, do we tell them it's a weather balloon? Do we tell them it's a radiation detecting piece of equipment? What do we tell the public? And so they messed this up, and it just stirred the pot that they're covering something up. And so it looked like a government cover-up, and so then years later they had to go in, and this was 1968, so quite a few years later. But it just boiled for years, and so then they put up Projects Grudge and Blue Book, and these are the reports that were published in 1968, studying UFO phenomenon and everything. So this current Air Force report or study that they're about to do, or this government report and study of UFOs, it's not our first one. We've done this in the past. And of course, everybody criticizes them because they say, well, 95% of them are explainable, and people don't like that result. So conspiracy theories, they feel great. Why does a conspiracy theory feel great?
Because we're prideful human beings.
We're prideful human beings. Yes, that's right. What makes it tickle our pride?
Because I know something.
We believe the government is lying to us.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's demonstrable in a lot of cases, but we feel like we know it. Like I figured it out. Now I know they're lying to me. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's definitely confirmation bias. We cherry pick the data that supports our view, and we blind ourselves to contradictory data. So that's just everybody. Everybody is susceptible to confirmation bias. But the absence in a conspiracy theory, if it's a really good conspiracy, there should be an absence of evidence. They're good at covering things up. And so that makes you feel great because you see it and other people don't. And you're an insider, And then you're welcomed by the other insiders, and so it's great. I mean, it just builds on itself, and so you've got to really fight that tendency to just dive in, and you need to always be able to say, "What if I'm wrong? What would it look like? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong?" And instead of because a true conspiracy theory person is really difficult for them to ask that question, "What if I'm wrong?" Yeah. And so this is not related to UFOs at all. This is related to evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. J. Warner Wallace said, for the disciples to steal the body and successfully pull off that conspiracy, he says he's a cold case detective and a investigative police officer. And he had studied many successful conspiracies. And so he said, here's 5 criteria for successful conspiracies. So he said they have to be a small number of conspirators. So like 12 disciples, that number's too big. In fact, Chuck Colson said only 3 people had to keep their mouths shut in Watergate, and nobody would have gone to jail. And he said, somebody spoke and he went to jail. So Chuck Colson ended up in prison because 3 people couldn't keep their mouths shut. Yeah.
It's hard.
It's hard.
It's a fire.
Yeah. Oh man, I know. And so, so it's hard for a large group to maintain a lie. There has to be constant communication because you don't want to know, like you want to know what the other person has told the police so that you can tell the same story. And so you got to constantly be in contact. How could the disciples have done that? They were spread all over the place, you know, and there was some in Jerusalem, some in Antioch, some in Rome, spread all over. And so, you know, short time span. And so, you know, the conspiracy went, I mean, Paul looks like he was in Rome up into the 60s. AD 70 is the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and Acts doesn't talk about that. So we think that he was beheaded in Rome sometime before 70 AD. So that's a pretty long time frame, several years. But and then you need to be really close to each other. So like families are probably the most successful conspirators. You know? Yeah, somebody in the family kills somebody and the rest of the family keeps the secret. And that bond of family relations is key, right? Because strangers will betray one another. But family, you know, they say, you know, blood is thicker than water, right? And so, and then little or no pressure. So the disciples being beheaded or sawn in two or oil poured on them or whatever. Crucified upside down, you know. Again, if you start putting pressure on somebody and they know that it's a lie, they're going to crack. You know, and like Chuck Colson, nobody even threatened the person with death, and yet they still ratted on Chuck Colson, and so he went to jail. So without all 5, it's not very likely that the conspiracy will succeed. So think about a government conspiracy. Small number of conspirators, not the government, no. And long time periods from 1947 to the present. You know, what person who did experiments on aliens wouldn't, at their deathbed, call a reporter and say, have I got a story for you? They've got nothing to lose, right? Here's the photographs that I snuck out in my, you know, socks, and I can give you pictures of the inside of Area 51 and the number of people that would have had to just maintain that facility over the years is hundreds upon hundreds of people. So, and then a long time period, and then thorough communication. What was told to this person? What was told to that person, and everything. So, I just don't think that the conspiracy thing that, you know, aliens have visited our planet and that we've got them locked up someplace, and they're telling us the secrets of the universe. You know. So anyway. It just doesn't really fit these criteria. So that's kind of what I'm doing is how does the government UFO conspiracy theory stack up against this list? And anyway, a true believer would say, well, that list is a conspiracy. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's right. I'm being paid. I did work for the government for 4 years. So, yeah.
And you still do.
Yeah, that's right. I guess I work for the state government. Yeah. So let's talk about these residual, the 5%. All right. So we're past the conspiracy theories and all of that. So what do we make of the 5% of UFOs that are unexplainable? There are some trends. So there's trends and they're fairly repeatable. That doesn't mean that the phenomena can be like triggered. It's not like that repeatable. Like I can boil water today and then I can set it up again and boil it again tomorrow. But there's some trends, like the 10 times as many sightings happen at 3 a.m. than happen at 6 a.m. or 8 p.m. And so, you know, there's a time frame that seems to be more repeatable. I don't know what's magic about 3 a.m., but yeah. The majority are in remote areas. And that seems bizarre because there's more people in the city looking at the sky at any given moment than in the rural areas. Okay, so you would think that you'd be on a rooftop bar or something, and a spaceship would go by, and everybody would see it. Of course, they're all drunk, and they're like, "Yeah, that was cool," and they don't report it. but out in the remote areas, lonely roads are more common than fields or villages. So yeah, there's remote villages, there's remote fields, but most of the time it's on the road or seen from the road. And the witnesses are almost always less than 6 people. So that's interesting. And then, so this is a distillation. They've got tons and tons of reports in the book. So this is kind of a distillation of that chapter of the different experiences. And this is interesting. It's not necessarily related to the people who look at the sky the most. So pilots don't have any more or less sightings than just random Joe driving down the rural road. And you would think if it was in the air all the time, pilots, astronomers, and air traffic controllers who are always looking at the sky would see more of them. So it doesn't seem to be randomly distributed across the sky, because if it were, then pilots would see more than the average Joe driving down the road.
Do they see less?
That I don't know. I have to dig back into the chapter. Mm-hmm. And so then what are the properties? So this is the sort of the trends of occurrences. Okay, do you see the difference? This is sort of, if we were just triggering or counting how many times they happened and to whom and all of that. But what are the experiences like? Like, what do we see? So these are the properties. They appear to have physical effects on our universe. So that would be like depressions in the ground or scorch marks or whatever. They show up on radar, so they interact with radiation and invisible radiation too. You could see them sometimes. They can lead physical injuries. So those are, again, if somebody's been injured by this, that's a little bit less discountable, than just seeing
It's more
something.
objective.
Yeah. They say they got a broken arm or something. But this is interesting. When they seem to crash to ground and there's a scorch mark and a depression, there's no physical debris. So they've searched and sifted the sand and looked, and they don't find any exotic metals or anything unusual.
So weird.
That's the weird one, yeah. That there's no physical, and that's against the forensic science Locard's principle, that whenever 2 objects touch, there's an exchange. And that's one of the basic principles of forensic science. Is if somebody is hit by a car and there's a hit and run, the car has left something on that body, and the body has left something on the car. And so you got to search around. Is it a piece of torn fabric from their clothing on the car? And is there a little bit of glass from a broken headlight in the fabric on the body? That's a perfect example of Locard's principle. You've got an exchange, glass on the body and fabric on the car. Here we have some physical effect, a depression in the ground, but no physical debris. Yeah, so that's very strange. And then no sonic boom. So when something goes by at 8,000 meters per second or whatever, you would hear a big boom if it was a plane. A huge boom. Yeah. Have you ever heard a sonic boom? It's great. Sometimes at air shows, they'll go by at faster than the speed of sound, and you just feel your body go boom. And in Oregon one time, we were in our house. We had a double wide trailer out on 4 acres, kind of out in the country. And we're in the house, and I hear a sonic boom. Boom. And I was like, I ran outside, and I'm looking in the air. I was like, where's the plane? Of course, it's way by, but maybe there's a second one coming. So I'm ready for the next sonic boom. And then I hear another one, boom. And I look over, and there's a huge fire, and it was the guy next door. He was making this huge burn pile, and he had put Coleman fuel to get it started, and then he capped the metal container and threw it on there and lit it. And so the metal containers were blowing up. Not related to UFOs, but it was really loud. And so this is kind of interesting that they could travel so fast and not leave a sonic boom. So there doesn't appear to be air resistance. The other thing, too, is something traveling that fast, especially low in the atmosphere, would heat up like crazy. And so that's why we have the heat shields on the space shuttle. When it comes in, the air resistance can get up to 1,000 degrees on the surface, and there doesn't seem to be any air resistance with these objects and how fast they go. So, and they seem to be out of focus, and they seem to change shape. And so we saw that in the videos. It was hard for them. They could lock onto it, but it wasn't a real crisp image. And that just seems to be a feature. Even when you have really good camera equipment, really good lenses that in other distances would see something with a fine focus, these are difficult to focus on. And they have injured and killed humans with no physical weapon. So there's been no sort of physical interaction, and yet humans have been injured and killed. So there's a longer list on 69 and 70. I just didn't want to bore you by listing everything, but yeah. And so also they emit light that casts no shadows. That's bizarre. Yeah. Anyway, they've been known to melt asphalt and metal objects and burn grass, but without fire or flame. So that's bizarre too. So anyway, some strange properties. And so, like I said, these are difficult to explain away, right? Seeing something travel fast through the sky, a distant sighting, I don't know what that was. It could have been, a rocket, some research rocket. And so, 95% are explained away, but these 5% that are residual UFOs, what are the theories? I mean, they could be alien tech, right? They've got some spaceship made out of some heavy, dense metal or something like that doesn't come off when it hits things or what have you. So that's called the extraterrestrial hypothesis. That physical aliens within our universe are frequently visiting us. And then there's the interdimensional hypothesis. So UFOs are real phenomena. They interact with our physical universe, but from the outside. So we have to explore what the outside means. Is this a part of the multiverse? Like, are we a small physical universe in a larger multiverse of many other physical universes? Now, mathematically, they say in this sort of standard model that the way our physics works is that these universes can't interact, but maybe they're wrong on that. Maybe there's a way for other universes to interact with ours. Or outside could also be a larger realm or like a spiritual realm. And both of these, whether it's outside our physical universe and it's another physical universe, or outside our physical universe being a spiritual or supernatural universe, they're both criticized as being supernatural because they're outside of natural physics. So both of these interdimensional hypotheses are really criticized as being, well, that's supernatural, and we are going to stick to the natural. So it's tempting, as scientists, I'm a scientist, it's tempting to say, all right, it's got to be a natural explanation. So here's the problem with the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And this is where Hugh Ross really comes in with his astrophysical knowledge. And he goes through that this is really the thing that busts the natural phenomenon, that the cosmic speed limit is the speed of light. And there's just no time for any creature to come from a neighboring planet. They're all too far away. And if you want to call it a natural process, they can't get here in time. They might get here after their species has already gone extinct. They would have to leave before our species even showed up. So unless they travel faster than the speed of light, which is a non-natural, a supernatural phenomenon, it can't be a natural phenomenon. And then he goes through also the probabilities of evolution, where their society would evolve and ours would evolve. Again, this is using natural processes, right? We're not talking about God creating creatures. God, could do that. But if this natural scientist wants to stay within the natural realm, then evolution is the only toolbox. So the aliens evolved, we evolved. It's already improbable that we would have evolved. Okay, there's a whole anthropic principle, 300 criteria or more that make Earth unique. Now we've got to have another planet that's unique for a different kind of race of species or different kind of species, and that they would evolve at the right time window. Then they would have the desire to even detect us and come visit us. And then the time it would take to travel, they would have to leave before we even showed up on the planet. And then they get here and they couldn't go back because they would get back after their species is extinct. and they fly here just to watch our Navy pilots fly around. They travel faster than the speed of light, and they're playing tricks on our Navy pilots. You know, there doesn't seem to be a lot of coherence to the physical thing, but really the big deal is this cosmic speed limit. There's just no time to get here from there or there from here. Now you say, what about wormholes? What about faster than, you know, Mach or Warp 9, you know, from Star Trek? None of that is natural. That would be classified as supernatural. You figure out how to break the cosmic speed limit, we're no longer in our natural phenomenon. So, ever since Robert Jastrow in 1978 wrote this book, God and the Astronomers, and he was talking about the fine-tuning of the universe and how it's really difficult to explain the fine-tuning of the universe without a divine hand being involved. You know, he's answering the question, who banged the Big Bang, right? And he was like an agnostic. He's not a Christian trying to make the case. He's just saying, this just seems too perfect. And so this initial expansion rate of the universe was way faster than the speed of light. So he's saying right there is evidence of a supernatural phenomenon. And so then a supernatural origin is not absurd. And so then after that, there was a flood of God and physics books, like God and the New Physics, God, the God Particle, God and the Cosmologist. So physicists have really sort of latched on to some of this idea, especially with fine-tuning and the beauty of symmetry and particle physics and so on. And so in physics, at least, they're kind of toying with the idea that there may be more than just the natural realm. Now, that, you know, many of them would disagree, but it just seems to be what's going on, at least in the physics literature. So let's talk about the interdimensional hypothesis. Okay, since the supernatural door has been cracked open by the finely tuned Big Bang, of course, natural scientists want to put this little latch on the door, right? They're like, it applies to the Big Bang only, right? So yes, the Big Bang happened supernaturally, faster than the speed of light, but nothing else, right? We can't let that door open all the way. And even they say we can't let a divine foot in the door. That Richard Lewontin, I think, said that. Yeah, and so they would like to put this little child lock on there. And scientists love to put that safety latch and say that the Big Bang is a special case. This Vallée guy, the guy that was doing the classifications in his research, you know, he said that these residual UFOs represent evidence for other dimensions. Evidence of the multiverse. And the thing is that natural science cannot test this because, again, how are we going to put something that travels faster than the speed of light in our natural science test tube, if you will? But that doesn't mean we're without tools. We test theories all the time in history. We test theories all the time in archaeology or forensics and so on. Whenever we're doing in the court of law, we're testing theories. Was this person at the scene? Did they possess the physical stature that the witness said that the person looked like? And do they have evidence on their clothing and so on? And we test those for consistency, coherence, explanatory power, explanatory scope, and minimal ad hocness. So ad hocness is the exceptions, right? When you have a theory and you have exceptions, that's an ad hoc exception. So ad hoc just is Latin it means for this. Like for this case, we'll say this, but for everything else, we'll say carbon needs an octet, right? Or when we get to phosphorus, then we're like, well, it doesn't necessarily need an octet. Maybe it can have 10 electrons instead of 8. So that's a ad hoc add-on to the theory. So this biblical worldview is unique in how it addresses UFOs. So it's unique among world religions and alien religions. And there have been religions that popped up over some of these alien interactions. So the internal consistency of the alien descriptions and other world religions fail in consistency and coherence, explanatory power and scope, and ad hocness. Just take like the Greek pantheon, the gods fighting against each other and sort of this chaotic interaction of these gods with with us, their subjects, is too chaotic for our ordered universe. our ordered universe, it does have some chaos in it, but it's not what we would expect to see if you really had Zeus and Apollo and all of them fighting it out. And so that fails in its explanatory scope and its coherence and so on. The Bible emerges way above other religions in these rational criteria. So it's able to explain the Big Bang. And with regard to UFOs, there are spiritual beings in the biblical worldview that interact with humanity, and they leave behind effects without physical debris. Okay? They can interact with the environment and interact with humans. And so there's at least all of the residual UFO phenomenon fall within things that a biblical worldview can explain. Does that make sense? So in forensics, we would say it's consistent with. So these actual, or we would say residual UFO experiences are consistent with a biblical worldview. So they would fit within that worldview, okay? And so this could be criticized as a God of the gaps explanation, where we say, oh, we've got this unknown thing called this abductee or this contactee, phenomenon. And so we're just going to stick God in that gap, right? And that's faulty logic, right? And they always use the example that, the cavemen didn't know about meteorology, and they hear thunder and they see lightning and they think the gods are fighting it out. And so they didn't know about thunder and lightning, so they stick God in the gap. And that's the criticism typically. But this is not what's going on, because the explanations of these types of experiences existed before the gaps. So we didn't hear about someone talking about UFOs and come up with this idea of a demon, right? The idea of a demon was way before any of these experiences. So it would be God of the gaps if we run across a person who says, I was abducted by an alien, and I said, gee, that sounds weird. That doesn't fit in my biblical worldview. Oh, I bet it's some new spiritual creature that I've never heard of and never thought about, and we're just going to call it a demon, right? That would be a God of the gap. You present me with the gap, and I make up something to fill it. That's not the situation here. We have sort of predictions that these kinds of things would happen in the Bible, and then I'm not surprised that we see troubling experiences that people have. Now, assigning it to aliens, that may just be a misattribution. Okay, so let's look at some of the residual UFO effects on people and animals. They do appear to affect mammals, typically domesticated animals like dogs and cats, but cattle and other kinds of things too. They intense fear, distress, and anxiety. So some of the characteristics of these residual experiences would be disturbing emotions. And some of the people have been known to tremble for hours, unable to speak or move. Okay? Yeah, often these disturbances increase for weeks following the experience. So you would think it would get less and less. I was in a car accident. I was traumatized for a couple of days, but after 2 days, I didn't really feel traumatized. It got better with time. And a lot of times these emotional disturbances increase for weeks following the experience. Yeah, that is weird. Bodily and physical harm. So nausea, headaches, hair loss, sounds like an ad for a drug, Diminished vision, diarrhea, swelling, paralysis, sleep cycle changes, weight loss, sunburns, wounds, and even death. And so
it's funny because that comment is the last one.
That's right. Yeah. And so some of these, that would be very unlikely to be a hoax, burns and wounds. Now you might okay, maybe it's domestic violence, right? And you don't want to admit that, so you blame it on a UFO. Okay. But those would be one of those situations where they might be discounted, like part of the 95, and say, oh, this person thinks they were abducted, they've got wounds, but all their friends have telling us that they've been exhibiting domestic violence evidence for months now, and it's probably not an alien, and so might want to arrest that guy. Yeah. But that would be one that would be a UFO not a RUFO, not a residual UFO experience. Okay, that would be explainable and be part of the 95. So these would be ones that could not be explained away. And then deception. So the person, okay, so like the alien or being that's interacting with me is claiming that they're visitors from distant planets and things like that. And then they preach against naturalism, and in almost every case against an orthodox understanding of Christianity. So they say that there's more to the world than the natural world, but there's no one religion that's right, and Jesus was just a good teacher, he was not the Son of God, and these kinds of things where they preach clearly against the teachings of the Christian church and against naturalism. And then as a result of that, some of the experienced people, the abductees or contactees, were on board with that and have continued to try to contact this person. And some say they have their alien contactee and they get messages from them, and religions have sprung up from this. Yeah, that's right. And so you heard recently the Heaven's Gate cult. They all met on this one mountain to welcome the return of their alien person, and they all committed suicide on this mountain. Yeah. Let's see what book this was. Oh yeah, it is really horrible. Let me find that chapter. Because it goes through, there's the Arthurus Society, the Unarius Academy of Science. There's those are UFO cults. Yeah, so there's just a lot. Let's see, where was Heaven's Gate? The Raelian movement. Here's Heaven's Gate. Yeah. Yeah, it was. It came to the attention of most people only in '97 when the news media reported that 39 people had committed suicide in San Diego. 97. Believing their spirits would go to a UFO that was behind a comet. So Heaven's Gate was a small cult, but it demonstrates the danger that these new religions can pose. So at the center of Heaven's Gate cult were two individuals, Marshall Herf Applewhite and Bonnie Lou Nettles. They were born in 1931. He was son of a Presbyterian minister. He served as professor of music at the University of St. Thomas and directed the music at St. Mark's Episcopal Church, both located in Houston, Texas. Eventually, his admission of being sexually confused led to scandal and loss of employment and psychiatric problems. Let's see. I'm trying to get to the point where they had their UFO. They believed and taught that they were incarnate extraterrestrials who channeled important information to human beings. And so when they had their experiences, then they took that as, they were contacted, and they thought that behind, I think it was the Hale-Bopp comet, that their ship was coming close to the Earth and that they were going to commit suicide and be welcomed by the aliens. Yeah, it really is. And so the biblical experiences and descriptions of demonic activity clearly fit the description of non-physical entities that are powerful enemies of humanity, who can instill harm and fear. And so demonology, this was a paragraph out of this guy's book, and he's an agnostic and a lifetime UFO researcher. And he says demonology is not just another crackpotology. He said it's the ancient and scholarly study of monsters and demons who have seemingly coexisted with man throughout history. And this is that sort of the Halloween scary part, right? for tonight. Thousands of books have been written on the subject, many of them authored by educated clergymen, scientists, scholars, and uncounted numbers of well-documented demonic events are readily available to every researcher. The manifestations and occurrences described in this imposing literature are similar, if not entirely identical, to the UFO phenomenon itself. And so when he was looking at the UFO phenomenon and he started looking at the demonic literature or the recording of these demonic activities, he was like, wow, these line up almost exactly. He said the victims of demonomania suffer the same medical and emotional symptoms as the UFO contactees. So that's not to say that this pilot seeing a flyby is going to be, but we're talking about the close encounter people that have, like the fourth and fifth kind, where they're actually contacted and interacted with what they think is aliens, or what the alien is telling them. I'm an alien from another planet, right? And so it's kind of crazy stuff. I don't feel like I'm just taking an unknown thing like a UFO and just, sticking a demon in there. It's more like the physical effects. This is the thing that kind of convinces me that it fits more within a biblical worldview, is the physical and social and psychological effects of these contacts and abductees. I mean, what is an abductee? If you talk to someone who's into astrology and astral travel on the astral plane and all of this out-of-body experiences, sounds exactly like what these abductees are describing, right? That they are in a trance and essentially go with the alien. And, so they have seen spaceships and the same kind of characters they saw at the Roswell Museum, right? I mean, why wouldn't a deceiving demon give you those experiences if that's what you were expecting, right? I'm gonna make you see the long, slender white thing with 3 fingers. It's gonna make my deception even more convincing to just give you that psychological experience. Yeah. So should you be afraid? I mean, it's pretty terrifying, right? No. But I would say this: don't poke the bear. Okay. In almost every case, these UFO contactees or abductees dabbled in the occult. They played around with tarot cards and Ouija boards and Reiki readings and so on. And so when they investigate this, they ask them, do you have any astrology experience or whatever? Oh, yeah. I talked to this person downtown and she does readings for me and all of that. And they're poking the bear. They're opening themselves up to spiritual attack. I mean, if you're already doing that, a demon's like, okay, here, I got an easy mark. It's like walking down the sidewalk, counting your money, in New York City. You're like, I'm going to go to the store here. How much money do I have? I mean, really, right? I mean, my friend did that. We went on a choir tour in New York City. And so we're walking around, and my friend, we were going to go into this one store, and he pulls his wallet out, and he starts looking at it, and there's a police officer on the corner, and he goes, hey. And I looked up and he goes, tell him to put his wallet away. And I said, Mickey, put away your wallet. He goes, oh, yeah, okay. So, and so it was crazy. And so then we came out of the store and we went by the police officer and I said, thank you. And he goes, well, there's 3 people that are going to follow you now for another couple of blocks. And he said, where's your hotel? And we said, it's just 2 blocks that way. And he said, okay, I'll watch you until you get to the doorman.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And so he stood on the corner and made it very obvious he was watching us too, as we walked our way down to the hotel and the doorman saw us and then we got in. But yeah, 3 or 4 people were following us.
Wow.
Yeah, for real. Yeah.
I want to be a
police
officer in New York City.
Yeah, this was let's see, I graduated in 87, so this is probably 1988, yeah. And so anyway, it was crazy. But my point is an easy mark, right? And so you're playing around with the Ouija board and the tarot card, and the tarot cards are cool looking. I mean, they're interesting pictures and stuff, but don't poke the bear. Why make yourself an easy mark? Now, as a Christian, I don't think that you're that vulnerable to, yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know that you could be attacked by demons. I mean, your house isn't empty. Jesus talks about cleaning the house and leaving it empty, and then demon can come right in. And so when you become a Christian, you're filled with the Holy Spirit. So your house is full. It's occupied. And it's occupied by a being much stronger than any of these other beings. But the devil can't have your soul, but he might be able to have your fear. And that's why I don't watch scary movies and stuff too. It's just, I don't mind being scared. It's kind of fun, but it goes too far sometimes, and I don't like to see the destruction of God's image bearers, humans. I don't like the slasher movies, lots of guts and gore. I mean, to me, that's a desecration of God's image. And so I don't really enjoy that. And then I really don't like the spiritual ones, the voodoo ones and stuff like that, because that just freaks me out. Because
I never watched The Conjuring.
that's within my worldview, right? So it strikes me as possibly too real, you know. And so I just don't like that stuff. And I certainly don't mess around with the astrology. I mean, I'll read a horoscope or whatever just because it's funny sometimes, you know, but I won't like go find one. But, you know, I look down and I see, I was like, oh yeah, what's Virgo? You know, oh, that's so generally written, you know, it's going to apply to anybody. And it's just funny. Yeah. But I don't really see that as poking the bear. But like if you religiously go and try to get your daily horoscope and you really put a lot of stock in it, and then you're going to get even more involved and go talk to an astrologer to read your planets and everything. Oh yeah, it's just not good. So that's my whole talk on UFOs. I know I did all the talking, but it was more like a book report.
That was really interesting.
Yeah. Good. So what questions do you have? It's your time.
It's like, why do they keep Area 51 so hidden? Like they like create that curiosity amongst themselves.
But you know, honestly, every base is that way. You can't just walk up to Lackland. You know.
Yeah.
I was gonna take some pictures of Carswell Air Force Base. You know, and up there at up on Quebec Road in Fort Worth, you can see the base. It's a beautiful picture. You got the B-52 bombers and the KC-135 tankers and everything like that, and it's just really cool. And I was testing out my new zoom lens, and so I put on my tripod, and I'm up there taking pictures. And I was in high school, so this is 85, 84, or whatever, brand new camera, and a fella stopped. He probably was off duty or something, but he was related to the Air Force Base, and he stopped and he's like, "What are you taking pictures of the Air Force Base for?" And I was like, "Well, I think it's interesting." He's like, "Don't do that. Put the camera up." You know, I was like, "Yes, sir. Okay." You know, and that was way before 9/11. You know, now of course that would definitely, yeah, you would definitely trigger. Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, but Area 51 has this mystique. Now, Lockheed Martin had this super secret research division called Skunk Works, and they are the ones that made the F-117A. Have you ever seen a picture of it?
No.
Okay, this is the first stealth fighter. Okay, F-117A. Now you tell me if this doesn't look like a UFO. Okay, so let me go over here and do this again. Where is it? Chrome, yeah, here we go. Look at that. That's an airplane. That's the first stealth fighter. Now, the reason it's so goofy looking, look at all the angles. And if I'm shooting radar at this, notice there's never a surface that faces forward.
Yeah.
So it bounces the radar off at oblique angles. Yeah, this is a great story. And of course, they test flew this at Area 51 and Edwards Air Force Base out there in the desert. And that was the first place it took flight. So if you see this, the daytime, whatever, you're like, dude, I saw a UFO. I mean, it does not look like any kind of airplane that you've ever seen before. And there's a great book called Skunk Works. I highly recommend it if you like aviation and stuff like that and secret stuff like this. So there was a Russian guy that wrote the math for radar cross sections. So like we calculate the transition dipole moment integral in PChem, so the calculus associated with light interacting with matter, he wrote all the papers for light bouncing off of geometric shapes. Okay, and so what percentage of the light would return? This is a Russian mathematician, like in Moscow, and one of our scientists found it. He's like, I wonder if I could calculate the radar cross section of a plane. And so they got the paper and they used the Russian guy's math to make the stealth fighter. And the Russians didn't know about this. They didn't make the stealth fighter. We did, using the Russian math. It's really a great story. So they made this plywood mock-up, and they had a radar facility where they could put designs up there and blast it with radar and see what the return was. And they made a mock-up out of plywood for this plane, and they stuck it on the pedestal, and they turned on the radar, And they said to the guy, your plane must have fallen off the pedestal because we don't see anything. And the guy said, no, it's there. And it was like, no, we don't see, the radar goes by, no blip, right? And then a bird lands on the model, and the guy goes, okay, now we see it. So they could see the bird, and they couldn't see the plane. And they knew they were onto something. And so they're like, okay, we got to make a plane out of this. They wanted to make it light and strong, and they needed to make it out of titanium. We didn't have enough titanium in our country at the time. And Russia had a lot of titanium. So we built, the CIA made 2 or 3 shell companies that bought Russian titanium, like in a communist country, and then they sold it to a less communist country business, and then that business sold it to a American-friendly business, and then the Americans bought the titanium. And so we bought Russian titanium and the Russian math plans and made the F-117A stealth fighter out of it. Yeah, it's crazy. And it's, anyway, very determined. And then we tested it in Grenada. So there's a little skirmish that happened in Grenada in the Caribbean, and Fidel Castro's troops took over Grenada, and then we went in and kicked them out. And so we tested. That was the first conflict this plane saw. And then Baghdad, this was the first real test. We flew these right into Baghdad, all the radars blasting the planes, and they never saw us. Yeah. And you could see the pictures of Baghdad at night with the anti-aircraft guns and everything shooting in just random directions, is because they couldn't see our planes. Yeah. So that might be a video too. Yeah, exactly. There was a show that was really fun to watch called Wings. And let's see, Gulf War. Here it is. Third night. I think this is the one I saw. There's definitely a green type video. No, this isn't it. Yeah, those are the sirens. This is where Wolf Blitzer, I don't know if you know Wolf Blitzer, he became famous in Baghdad. Anyway.
We're seeing traces over the sky here. Takes a while to get here.
Yeah, so you see, this isn't the one. The video I'm thinking of, it just looks crazy. There's just tracers going in all directions. Yeah, and the planes are flying right over and dropping their bombs on communication places and radar installations and things like that. So anyway, that's kind of an aside. Any other questions? We're almost out of time. Was it anticlimactic to just come back full circle and think these might be demonic interactions?
I think the whole contact experience being very similar, it's like, I can see why.
And totally convincing, because you really did interact with something. Mm-hmm. You just think it was an alien. Yeah. And the emotional distress too, it really fits with some of the things that we see, in the Gospels and other places. Yeah.
It also makes sense that they're not going to say that it's a demon, because then that would, it's just too easy. It's better and easier to get them to think about other stuff.
Yeah.
Rather than just demon.
And think of how that could backfire. So I tell you I'm a demon, right? Where are you going to find information about demons? You're going to go read the Bible. And you're going to say, oh man, Jesus was more powerful than the demons. I need to go to Jesus to get this out of me or deal with this. So I'm going to talk bad about Jesus. I'm going to say, oh, don't worry about him. His teachings, forget about him. And this is an alien thing. This is a physical thing. I flew here really fast because we have higher tech than you guys. And listen to me. I've got wisdom. And there's more to life than plain old physics. Those guys don't know everything. You need to get to a higher plane where we can talk on a regular basis. You can really, buy into that deception. And then especially if it's super traumatic. Yeah. You can't get it out of your mind. Yeah. It really messes with you. So I really enjoyed reading it. So it's not very long. It's maybe, and I even kind of skimmed some of it. 250 page. No, 200. There's a lot of notes, like footnotes. Probably 30 pages of footnotes. 40. Okay, it's about 186 pages. So that's not a bad read. Okay, so coming up on the end of the semester, we only got a few more sections left. What is? Okay, next week Todd Prim will be back. We'll be discussing the Trinity. And then hopefully Denise Figline can help us as we deep dive into Revelation on November 14th. And then number 21st, how does prayer work? Is God my butler? And does he have to give me anything I ask? And then November 28th will be s'mores and hot dogs at my house. And so I'll send you the directions on Remind and a piece of cake.